Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of the Coaster Report. This is a show slash podcast slash presentation thing I do when I go to a theme park, and then I come back and I tell you all about it, do a little review, talk about some coasters, talk about my experience, and it's a lot of fun. Yo, Brew! Skyrocket is number one. Well, you'll see. We got ride rankings at the end. Don't worry about it. So a little bit of background. So if you're unfamiliar, Kennywood is a park in the Pittsburgh suburbs. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, about 2 hours away from Kennywood. Never been there my whole life. This is the first time I've ever been there. I don't know why my parents never bothered to go there. I guess because Cedar Point was a little bit closer, but that's no excuse. I blame them for everything in my childhood going wrong on the fact that we never went to Kennywood. But I was up at visiting my family, my parents, this past weekend for holiday stuff, and I was like, well, I'll go home a little bit early, and I convinced my dad to come with me to Kennywood. So on this past Thursday, I took the day off and we drove out there and had a good time. Historical note, if you're watching this in the future, you may not remember, there have been some really bad Canadian wildfires recently, the past few weeks / months, and they've been making their way down into the US. Pittsburgh got hit really hard with the wildfire smoke. So that's why in these photos you'll see it looks a little bit Silent Hill-ish. So keep an eye out for that. Lots of fun. We did wear masks the whole day so we didn't die, which was, a little unpleasant, but it's worth not dying. So no vlog, Alley-Kate. This is the only content from Kennywood we got. I didn't record any video or anything. All right, so what we're gonna do, unlike previous coaster reports, I thought it'd be fun to go through all the rides that we're gonna talk about in chronological order on opening day. Mostly because there's one or two that need some context. So we'll start with the oldest ride in the park and end with the newest ride. So I think it's cool to see how many old rides there are at Kennywood, how old some of these rides are, and how many of them there are still kicking. For example, number one, Old Mill, 1901. This thing is 122 years old. It is a dark boat ride. You got a little boat, you go through this tiny little river that winds through a large building full of little show scenes, and it's super weird. This thing has gone through a bunch of iterations over the years. I think before this it was Garfield themed. There's a fantastic Defunctland documentary about that if you're interested in learning more. Currently it's themed around like old Western style stuff, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's pretty surreal and absurdist, but there's some cool blacklight effects and stuff. It wasn't bad. Wasn't great. It was a cool way to kill a few minutes though. It's nice to experience such an old ride. Although I don't know if there's a lot of stuff that's actually that old still left. The boats look like they are. They're pretty old. Pretty beat up. But the scenes are not. So, but yeah. All right. Coming up next, Jack Rabbit. This is the first of many wooden coasters. They have like 3/4. I call it 3. Old wooden coasters that are about 100 years old. Jack Rabbit is, I think, the one that people are big fans of, and I have a hot take. I didn't like Jack Rabbit very much. I thought it was kind of boring, and I get that it's very old. It's from 1920. Coasters were all pretty much like this back then. This is a weird layout. It doesn't really do a whole lot for me. You go down into a little valley, pop back up, and then you turn around and you do it again. You kind of loop around this valley, and that's kind of it. There's a double down that people like to talk about where you get a little bit of a ejector on, and that was fine, I guess, but like I wasn't up to make up for the rest of the layout, which I thought was really kind of boring. I will say, trains, super comfortable. I don't know how much they've been refurbished over the years, but they have like this incredibly thick padding on the back and sides. It's like you're sitting on a couch when you're on this roller coaster. There's a fixed lap bar, which doesn't really do much of anything. So that was cool. So yeah, 8+ trains on the Jackrabbit, but not a fan of layout. Kind of sad about that. But people like it anyway, so you know, this is just my opinion. If you like it, that's fine. I'm not gonna criticize anybody for liking a coaster. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so Enrico brings up a good point. We did sit in the middle. Yes, that's where we were asked to sit. We only got one ride on it. So it probably would be a better ride near the back. So that's why I do like to get multiple rides on coasters. I try to get in the back and the front. So this is one I would like to re-ride, try again one day in the back to see if it's any better. But, you know, I could only judge it based on the one ride I had. And the one ride I had was just fine. Not great. So, you know, again, these are my opinions based on one very subjective experience. So there you go. All right, our next oldest ride from 1924, Thunderbolt. This one actually had a little bit of remodeling, revamping done, I think, in the 60s, if I recall. But it still feels like a very old coaster. And this one is pretty good. This one requires you to ride with a partner because there are some pretty extreme laterals on it. You have a lot of unbanked turns at the bottoms of hills. And this, I don't even remember if there were seatbelts. I don't think there were, just till that bar, if I recall correctly. So you're slamming into your partner. Thunderbolt's the first coaster I remember riding. Well, that's a pretty good first coaster. Definitely more interesting than Jackrabbit. It still has the weird layout where it goes down into a ravine and pops back up, which I think is super weird layout. Like you've got one or two hills before the chain lift. But it's got a more interesting stuff going on. I think the fast turnarounds were more interesting. So not bad. Another old wooden coaster. Not a ton going on, but enjoyable for sure. There are seatbelts? Okay, I couldn't remember. This was less than a week ago and I've already forgotten. If I zoom in on this picture. Oh, I actually can see on this picture right here. You can't see it because it's so tiny, but there's a seatbelt in this picture right here. Okay. Anyway. Next up, our next oldest ride, they have a classic whip here at Kennywood. The same thing as the whips you'll find at Knoebels and Dorney. Jordan and I rode the whip at Dorney when there. This whip is pretty much exactly the same, except there's no roof on it. I liked the indoor whips because the roof adds a lot of echo, makes it a lot louder, and that makes it more exciting for some reason. Outdoor whip seems a little bit silly, but it's the same kind of ride regardless. You're getting the same experience either way. But yeah, it was fine. It's a whip. You ride your little car down the straightaway, and then you get slammed to the side as you go through the little turnarounds at the end, and that's it. It's a whip. I always will say that if you haven't been on a whip and you happen to come across one, go ride it because there are not very many of them left, and they're pretty fun. You know, it's nice that they've lasted this long though, so they might last a long time from, you know, in the future, but you never know. All right, our third and final of the old wooden coasters is Racer. You could count this as two wooden coasters, but it's actually a Mobius layout, so I consider it one coaster that you get 2 credits on, I guess. So yeah, this is a racing coaster where it's just another kind of out and back layout. It's fine. I don't know, there's not much to say about it. I guess kind of like all the other wooden coasters, it is very smooth. So one thing I will say that Kennywood does take very good care of their old rides. All 3 of the wooden coasters, very smooth, considering their age, compared to other wooden coasters I've ridden that are younger than these. Not very jolty, not very bumpy. They feel pretty good to ride it. And, you know, props to Kennywood for maintaining them well. So yeah, this was fine. There's not a whole lot of forces, not a whole lot of excitement. The racing wasn't great. I feel like one side always wins just because the way the first drop goes in the first turnaround is so big, and you know, the train on the inside is always going to win pretty much no matter what. That's just the way it was designed. But yeah, fun ride. Not much to say about it, but it's not bad. Okay. Another classic ride here, the Turtle. This is one of those supposed like classic rides that you gotta ride when you're over at Kennywood. This is the last of its kind, so they say. A Tumblebug from 1927. So this one, you are riding in a small train of turtle-shaped cars, and you go around this big circular track that has a bunch of hills around it. There's like 4 little hills around the outside, 3 or 4. No, just 3. And the 4th one's where the station is. And that's the whole ride. There's no seatbelts. There's just a little chain to strap you in, make sure you don't fall out. And you get some nice... you get some nice jolting around. I can't say that there's like laterals or anything, or airtime, but the seats are really slippery. So if you have very slippery shorts, as I do, my theme park shorts are quite slippery. You'll slide around in your seat a lot, which I guess is kind of fun. I was sitting sideways, like the guy in this top photo is, and you go through the hills, and then you know the train tilts up, your body tilts up, you slide to the side. It was kind of fun. Worth one ride just to say you did it. It was fun. Yeah, that's all. Enrique says lots of C minuses this park. Yeah, so the way I do the grading system, by the way, just for context, I like to have things on a curve. You know, C is the average, and by the way, C doesn't mean bad. F is bad. D means, you know, not really interesting or notable. C means average, and average for me is still pretty good because I like most rides. I enjoy riding most rides. So if you get C, that's still fine. I didn't dislike it. And then B's are for stuff that's really good, and then A's are for elite stuff. And you'll not see me throw out very many A's. I think I've only got 4 or 5 coasters into allowed grade in the A range. Just FYI. So this is all relative. My C minus, it doesn't mean the same thing as your C minus, probably. But yeah, Tumblebug, turtle thing, kind of fun. I don't know if it was worth a 20-minute wait, but it was enjoyable. I guess, you know, because it's the only place you could ride one of these. You gotta do the wait regardless. It was kind of fun seeing the mechanism that drives this. They've got a bunch of tiny little motors in each car with a little chain. That's the only thing that drives it. There's no like big central motor that drives the entire mechanism. Just a bunch of little tiny motors, and you can see them while you're waiting in line. So kind of figuring out the engineering is pretty neat. Imperial metric. These are imperial grades because we do live here in the United States. All right, next up, speaking of C's, Noah's Ark. This is another one of those very unique gotta do attractions at Kennywood. It's a walk-through funhouse, and it was weird. Can I explain the layout of Turtle again? It's a circle. That's all it is a circle. Noah's Ark. Anyway, you walk through it and you look at some weird dioramas of, you know, paper mache animals in little scenes, and then you walk through. There's 2 sections. There's a diorama section where you're just looking at scenes, whatever, if you like that kind of thing. Second section, there is the entire building rocks back and forth because it's a boat, and you're walking through some rooms that have different effects like moving floors, moving walls, weird funhouse mirrors, stuff like that. It's a funhouse. I haven't been in anything like this before, really, so this is kind of a new experience for me, and it's not really for me. It was fine. It's not a ride though. I'm just looking at stuff. You'll get pretty much the same experience if you just watch a video of it, really. The rocking building, I didn't care for. Made me feel a little seasick. So if you don't like that kind of thing, then just watch a video and you'll have all the experience with Noah's Ark you need. It was very strange. Parents had to vex when you look because your sister were horrified and sobbing. I can understand that. If you're a little kid and you don't know what you're getting into, I can understand that some of this would frighten a small child for sure. Used to be an elevator part. Oh, interesting. I imagine that it's not very accessible. There were, we'll give them credit for having different paths through some of the funhouse where, you know, this is the more accessible route. this is the route for people who are more able-bodied or whatever. So that was good of them to have different experiences, trying to be accommodating, which is cool. But yeah, it's a fun house. Whatever. Okay, next up we have Turtle Chase, and you might be thinking to yourself, no, Andrew, you just talked about the turtle a minute ago. Why do you have another slide for it? Well, it turns out it's not the only tumblebug at the park. There is, in fact, a second one. This is in the kiddie area of the park. They have a miniature version of the turtle, and there was a point around dinner time or so where we were kind of bored. Not bored, but we were walking around trying to decide what to do next. And we were like, well, let's walk through some of the parts of the park we haven't really seen yet. We haven't walked through the kiddie areas yet. So we walked around because it looked pretty nice. And I wanted to see what kind of rides they have. And they had this ride here. And there was nobody. The park wasn't dead, but it was pretty empty, you know, especially the kiddie areas. Not a lot of people. The operator here looked bored out of his gourd. And we were like, we looked at the sign and said, well, there's no height limit for this. Why don't we ask if we can ride? We don't have kids, but you know, maybe they'll let us on. So we got my dad and I, 2 6'1" and 6'4" adults with no children, riding the mini tumblebug. And it was the dumbest thing that we did all day, but honestly, it was fun because of how stupid it was, I think, was our peak enjoyment. Purely as a ride, not good. Maybe if you're a small child, then it would be good. I don't know how to judge based on that because I don't have any children. But this kind of felt like you're getting away with something you weren't supposed to do. But yeah, double tumblebugs. Yeah, that's right. How many parks can you go to and say you got 2 different tumblebugs on your score sheet that day? Not many. Borrow a kid from the orphanage for a day. I've heard of, you know, people borrowing other people's children just so they can get the kiddie coaster credits. And I don't know how I feel about that. But this rides like this that they don't require you to get a child for, you know, go for it. All right, more silly spinning around flat rides. We got the Kangaroo. This is another Kennywood classic, kind of like the turtle one you kind of have to do in order to get the full Kennywood experience. They tore this out a few years ago and then recently put it back because people were so outraged they got rid of the Kangaroo. So ride it while it's still here. You sit in a little cart, you spin in a circle very slowly, and then at one point in the circle you go up a little hill, and then you drop down. And that's the entire ride. It's incredibly silly. The little jump off the hill is actually pretty fine. You get some nice little jolt, I guess, as ejector, kind of. I don't know if you're going really fast enough for it to be considered ejector. But it's silly. It's a good family ride, I guess. It's a good ride for kids, and it's fine. I don't know what else to say about it. It's hard for me to come up with unique things to say about more rides that spin you in a circle. But yeah, if you haven't done it yet, give it a shot. I always try to get all the like unique flat rides, try to do them at least once. If I see a flat ride of a type I've never done before, you know, I want to see what that experience is like. This one's definitely unique, and I would give it a shot if you ever get the chance. So, you know, very silly. All right, now we're moving into some good stuff. Phantom's Revenge, one of the big steel coasters at the park. Originally built in 1991 by Arrow as a giant looping coaster and then converted by Morgan in 2001 into a hyper coaster. We got 3 rides on this thing, and it was great. I mean, I was expecting it to be good because based on my experience with Steel Force, I'm a big Morgan fan. This one doesn't disappoint. It's a big hyper. You got tall hill. You got fast drops. You got some turnarounds with some really good positive G's in them. I grayed out a little bit on the turnaround after the biggest drop. Cool stuff. And the end of the layout, you've got some really fast, almost violent ejector hills. And I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of ejector because, you know, it's not comfortable, but this was a lot of fun. I had a blast on Phantom's Revenge. Would have loved to do it more. The lines got a little bit longer at the end of the day, and it wasn't like, if we can't walk on, then we needed to do other things. But 3 rides on this was good. This is the second ride of the day, I think. And then as we got off the first time, there was still nobody waiting. So they let us just run back in the train without exiting the platform, which is pretty cool. They probably shouldn't have let us done that. I don't think that's standard operating procedure, but pretty cool anyway. Was this park empty? It wasn't empty. This was the second ride of the day, and it was pretty empty when we got in. We got in right when doors opened at 11. So they're running one train, but still, yeah, almost no wait for this thing at the beginning of the day. So yeah. Also, for anyone who cares, which is literally nobody except me, this is also, if you got a little trophy down here, my 100th credit. Hooray. I think it's just funny because I think beginning of last year with my first trip to Kings Island, I hit 50, and now in a year and a half later, I hit 100. I don't think this is a trajectory I can keep up, but you know, it's a fun milestone. Yeah, but yeah, great ride. All right, our next still coaster, Exterminator, the Reverchon Wild Mouse, built in 1999. And I was shocked and amazed to discover that there is such a thing as a good Wild Mouse coaster. I couldn't believe it when I got off this thing. It was actually fun. Especially considering, you know, the Dorney Park Wild Mouse, the Hershey Park Wild Mouse, even the Cedar Point Wild Mouse was just kind of whatever. But this one, this is a blast. I think the dark ride aspect, you can't see where we're going. There's some cool props and stuff in the building. And then halfway through, the spinning kicks in, and then you really don't know where you're going. I thought that really added to the ride experience. Plus, the cars are huge and super roomy, even for me and my dad, who are very tall. Tons of room, so you're going through those hairpin turns and you're not slamming into the sidewalls. It's not painful. Maybe that's why I was so happy when I got off this, that I wasn't hurting from being jammed in the sides of the car. It was comfortable, it was pleasant, it was fun. I like this a lot. We did ride this twice. This is the first ride of the day. I did look up, you know, first thing you want to do when you get there is to go on Exterminator, because the lines will get long because of the nature of this ride, low throughput. So we ran here, basically walked on, and we rode it again later in the day, waited for about half an hour. Were the operations of the park good? Asked Niall. They were okay. Some rides are better than others. It depends. I think most of the operations were good. It depends on how many trains are running. I think made a big deal. It made a big difference. We didn't really notice a ton of slowness, aside from there was a group of people at the park who were wheelchair bound, and they were there to enjoy the rides. So, you know, there are a couple points where we had to wait for them to load and unload those people, and that took a while, which is totally fine. I understand that completely. That slowed things down. I don't think I wouldn't blame that on the operations. I think the operations, for the most part, did okay. I wish there were a couple of rides that had more than one train, but other than that, not a lot of complaints. Would I rate this better than Cedar Point's Wild Mouse? I think it's hard to say. I think I had more fun on Exterminator, but it's probably because I was riding it with my dad, who also enjoyed himself a lot, and I rode Cedar Point's Wild Mouse essentially by myself because he couldn't ride it when we were there together. And that makes a big difference. I think who you're riding with can really impact your experience. I think I had more fun on Exterminator, but I need a couple more rides on Cedar Point's Wild Mouse to say for sure. All right, moving along. We have Cosmic Chaos. This is a Zamperla disco. I've ridden a couple discos before. I've ridden the big one they have at Cedar Point. I've ridden a tiny one at Busch Gardens. This is a kind of a medium-sized one. The seats are all different on them, which is kind of interesting. So this one you're sitting facing outward on a disc that spins. And it's fine. The worst thing about this ride is the seating arrangement. You're sitting on kind of like a little bicycle seat, and the restraint is that the seat back comes up against you and presses you in. As you're leaning forward, you're kind of crushed forward, and then you're further forced forward as the spin action of the ride takes you around. Not very comfortable for your lower extremities and your groinal area, for lack of a better word. Kind of crams you in there. So that wasn't very fun. I wish that had been a better experience, because I think this would have been a good ride if the restraints weren't uncomfortable. I generally like discos. The one at Cedar Point I enjoy quite a bit. I've ridden it a couple times. I think they're fun rides. Just, man, if the seats were a little bit better, this would have been good. But not bad. Yeah, I also say, like, your long cycle, if maybe the seats were better, I wouldn't have complained about the long cycle, but I feel like when the ride was maybe 2/3 over, I was like, okay, I want to get off Cosmic Chaos 1. So, you know, that's all very subjective. I'm sure it depends on your body shape and everything. Again, I'm tall, so I'm going to fit in coasters and rides differently than other people. All right, next up, Ghostwood Estate. This is a shooting dark ride. So how tall am I? I'm 6'1", so I'm not like absurdly tall, but I'm tall enough that RMCs are uncomfortable because of those leg restraints, because I have especially long legs. So if it can be hard to cram into certain ride vehicles, especially I've noticed this on like Premier rides. They always have tiny cars. I think everyone who works at Premier must be like 5 foot tall, because their trains are always, I always feel like I'm really crammed in there, and I hate it. Anyway, let's talk about a good ride though. Ghostwood Estate. This is their shooting dark ride. So I had to compare it to Boo Blasters on Boo Hill, which is the Cedar Fair Paramount Parks shooting dark rides. This is the Kennywood's version of that. You're in a little trackless car, which is pretty cool, and you go around the building, you go through some showrooms, and you shoot at some targets with your little laser gun. But it's the best shooting dark ride I've been on. You know, comparing it to Boo Blasters, comparing it to Reese's Cup Fusion at Hershey, this one is by far the best. The guns work. All the targets work great. You could see where you're shooting. The targets are responsive. The animatronic props are really good. The decorations were fantastic. All of the effects were physical props, not just screens and stuff. There were a couple screens, but they were integrated in well. To me, to be like, here's a painting. You think it's a painting, but it's a screen that has an effect that goes on it, rather than just the whole room being a screen like at Hershey. That's dumb. Don't do that. This was all real props. It was fantastic. Great ride. I got crushed by my dad, probably because he sat in front and he had a better view of all the targets. He got a score of 660 and I got a score of 440, which I'm sure the Ghostwood Estate pros will scoff at, but I don't know what a good score is there. I'm sure those aren't great scores. But yeah, really fun ride. Would do again every visit for sure. Next up, here's your favorite brew, Skyrocket, the premier launch coaster from 2010. This was our most ridden ride at 4 rides because the operations on this one were very good. We were able to basically walk onto this one at any time of day. There were just 2 trains, but they were just really churning through, doing a great job of getting guests through on this one. So that was awesome. And this was a really fun coaster. You had a nice launch. I liked that you go through the launch, you have a top hat, and there's a little break at the top of the top hat. So you kind of stall as you go over the top. And if you're in front, you get nice hang time, you get a nice view down the drop, which is a really cool feature. First half of this coaster is great. You've got some, like I said, the drop, the launch, a couple of nice rolls. And then the second half kind of peters off. After the mid-course, you go through like a little twisty little bit, a couple little bunny hops, and they felt really out of place. I'm not really sure what was supposed to happen. You're going so slow, they don't really do a whole lot of anything, which I thought was a little bit silly. But the first half of this coaster, very good. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites of the park for sure. Drop off the mid-course is one of your favorite airtime moments. I believe it. dropping off mid courses, it's one of my favorite parts of Dominator, as I've mentioned before. So I don't remember noticing it on Skyrocket. I think we braked a bit too much when we rode. They might have had the trims on a little bit harder than they needed to, and that might have been why I thought the second half was a little bit tame. So maybe if those were a little bit less trimmed, then it would have been better. But regardless, really fun coaster. Good stuff from Premier. Despite the fact that I was complaining about their trains a minute ago, actually these trains are pretty comfortable. Fit in them pretty okay. All right, next up, Steel Curtain. This was a big shock to me. You may notice already, A- grade. I said it a minute ago, A's are pretty rare for me, and I was not expecting this to be such a high scoring coaster for the park. I did not expect it to be the highest graded one. It looks just like, if you don't ride it, if you just look at it, it looks just like an inversion machine, and I don't have any problems with that. Inversions alone don't make a good coaster, and that's what it looks like this thing does, because it's inversion after inversion, but it does a lot more than that. All the drops are great. You get a nice speed off of them. You get some nice G's on those pullouts. The corkscrew after the lift hill, super weird, but it was actually really cool to go through like a really slow inversion at that height and then drop into the first hill. Pretty exciting. Some really good airtime hills, some speed hills on this thing. Not a dead moment to be found on Steel Curtain, start to finish. Fantastic ride. Only managed to get 2 rides in it. They were only running 1 train most of the day, which is why we had a 50-minute wait the first time around. Longest wait of the day. Really sucked. At some point around dinner time, I don't know why so late, they put a second train on, and then they were really chewing through people. So we got a very short wait the second time around. Wish I could have gotten more rides on this one, because it was awesome. I think this is the last entry on the list. Yo, breakfast. What's up? Spinvasion. This one is new for 2023. They were really hyping up this new ride and the revamping of this themed area of the park. And this was our least favorite ride. It's a spinny ride. You spin in a circle. And it kind of looks impressive because the seats are on rigid arms that swing out, and they'd have like a constant swinging motion as you're going around, which looks neat, but when you're on it, it doesn't really do anything. It's kind of boring, and it went on way too long. I was ready to get off about halfway through the ride cycle. Not a huge fan. It was mostly boring. Sorry, Spinvasion. I wish the swinging cycle was a bit more interesting, because other than that, it didn't really do anything. But that's it. I think that's all the rides. It's a lot of rides. We went on like, I think 16 unique rides, and with all the re-rides, it was probably double that. So good times were to be had. Finally, a lunch slide. So we were planning to go to Potato Patch, because everyone says, gotta go Potato Patch. That's where the best food is at Kennywood. And we were ready to go to lunch. It was like 2 or 3, so we're like, should be pretty dead. We walked over to Potato Patch, and it was packed. Super long line. I don't want to wait for that. So we walked around a bit, wandered into this diner place, ran into a super helpful employee who gave us some recommendations, and they said to go to Pizza Warehouse. So we went to Pizza Warehouse and we got some pizza. And I've complained about park pizza before, but this is actually pretty good. Maybe it's because we were really hungry, because I had hardly eaten anything all day. They had salads, which were great. Gotta get some vegetables, get some actual like fresh food when you're at a park. And they had French fries here, which I think I would have liked better than the ones at Potato Patch anyway. They were really nicely fried, really crispy. Good stuff. So nothing like mind-blowing, nothing fantastic, but it was very satisfying. It was a good meal at Pizza Warehouse. Would recommend. And I think that brings us to... Oh, did not ride. Always gotta have the did not ride slide. We rode pretty much everything. The only coaster we didn't get on was Lil Phantom, the little kiddie ride. I did not even bother to see if adults could ride it. I think we probably could have, but I don't go for kiddie coasters. I don't really care about them. Some people do. Whatever. Black Widow was closed. That is their giant frisbee ride. If familiar with like Max Air, Delirium at Cedar Point and Kings Island, respectively, they have a gigantic version of that. It's like twice as big as the other frisbees I've been on, and it looked awesome, but it was closed, which I was very sad about. So I did not get to ride that. Maybe one day I'll go back there and do the Black Widow. And all the other flats that I didn't mention, we obviously didn't ride. They have a lot of flat rides. Most of them are just clones of other flats I've been on before. Breakfast are getting super late. This is Kennywood in Pittsburgh. 43 asks, was my favorite flat of all time. I think I'm a big fan, off the top of my head, of the Screamin' Swing. So, Skyhawk at Cedar Point, for example. They had one here, and we thought about riding it, but didn't get around to it for whatever reason. I like the free fall sensation on those a lot. That's a good time. But yeah, they did have... We didn't ride anything at Thomas the Tank Engine World. I think that's what it's called. Part of the kiddie area is Thomas the Tank Engine themed, which if, you know, it were 30 years ago, I would have been ecstatic to go visit Thomas and his friends. It's not a huge part of the park, but it was still cool to walk around and see. They've got a train ride that goes through Thomas the Tank Engine Land, and they didn't retrofit the train to look like Thomas. It just looked like a regular steam train, which I thought was kind of weird that they wouldn't do that, but I guess it's part of their, you know, preservation policy. Not policy, but the way they handle their early old rides. I think that train is very old. They don't want to kind of ruin the look of it just to make it fit in with the rest of the kiddie area, but which I respect. Okay, that takes us to our ride rankings. If you've been paying attention, none of this should be super surprising. I did mention Steel Curtain, my surprising #1 pick. Didn't expect this one to hit #1. I figured it would have been Phantom's Revenge, which I did love Phantom's Revenge, but Steel Curtain edged it out just barely. Those top 3 coasters, fantastic top 3. Steel Curtain, Phantom's Revenge, Skyrocket, all very good coasters. How could something named Turtle Chase be at the bottom? You know, just because it's at the bottom of the list doesn't mean it was bad. I had fun riding it, but it deserves its placement. You missed like the entire presentation, Breakfast, so don't complain about the rankings when you don't even know what you're talking about. There are no actual animals in Noah's Ark, which if there were, then I would have probably ranked it a lot higher. 43 asked an interesting question. What are they missing to be a premium park? That's a good question. They've got classic woodies. They don't have any like modern woodies, like a Mystic Timbers kind of ride, which would be neat. Something that's, you know, a bit fast and more intense would be neat. But they've already got fast, intense rides. Steel Curtain, Phantom's Revenge, Skyrocket all kind of do that. They don't have I feel like maybe a classic B&M, like a B&M Looper or an invert. They don't have any inverted coasters. A B&M invert, I think, is kind of a gap in their extreme coaster lineup. That would probably work out pretty well. But I don't know. I can't think of a whole lot else because they've got a pretty nice variety already of rides, which I will talk about on the general thoughts slide. So overall, surprisingly nice park. Like I said, never been here before, so I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I was very impressed by the overall like aesthetics, the look and feel of the park. Felt like it was very nice, well kept, clean. They keep it, you know, modernized. They keep it up to date while also still preserving the old stuff, which I imagine is hard to do, but I enjoy just walking around looking at stuff, playing as Shade. All that stuff is very important. So, you know, could just walk around in. Like I said, they maintain their old rides very well. They've got so many old rides, like we talked about at the beginning, rides that are 100+ years old, and they're still doing real well. Those, like I said, those 3 Woodies, all very smooth. They ride really well. and hope they continue to maintain them the way they are, because they're doing a great job at keeping them running nicely. Kind of got in this already with 43, but yeah, nice selection of rides. They have a really good variety. They've got the plenty of kiddie stuff. They've got some flats for families. The wooden coasters are great family rides too, and they've got some extreme stuff for people like me who are there for the big coasters. Yeah, they used to have a log flume, that's true, and that was demolished to make way for steel curtain. I didn't think about that because I don't really care much for water rides, so it didn't really occur to me that that was something that they were missing. They have a river rapids, but it was drained when we were there last week. I don't know if they're planning on opening it up or not. But yeah, if you're a water ride fan, I guess Kennywood, not the place to go. There's not a lot of water ride stuff around. I talked about this already a little bit. Operations were hit. I wrote hit and miss, but I think on the whole they were pretty good. Mostly because they were only running one train on a lot of rides throughout the day. Thunderbolt's it has 3 trains. They were only running 1 in the morning. They put a second one on later. Thunderbolt didn't really need 2 trains. Definitely doesn't need 3, considering the crowd level. They wound up putting a second one on Jackrabbit later in the day too, which it still had a line at 2 trains. But Skyrocket had no line all day on 2 trains, so it kind of depends on the ride. But overall, I think they were pretty good. Not as bad as some of the other Pennsylvania parks that I've been to recently. Not gonna name any names. But that's it. That's all for Kennywood. Overall, like I said, I had a good time. I would definitely go there again, especially considering how close to them I live. And definitely would like to re-ride some of those rides. I would love to get another ride on Jackrabbit, maybe in a better seat. Might change my opinion of it. And some more laps on Steel Curtain, and Phantom's Revenge would be awesome too. So, but yeah, so that's all for that. Thanks everybody for watching.